Welcome to part 3 of our video series, Building an ASP.NET Web Application. What I'm going to do here is pick up where I left off in building our application, and at this point we're going to go to the Players controller, and let me just show you what we're going to build here first. We're going to get this section fleshed out here. We're going to go to the Players controller and take care of the index action where we wish to put up an index view and use a player view model intermediary class to package up data for the index view, which is going to be a list of players that we're going to put into a table. So let's start with the method itself here, the index method. So what we know is that we need to use the player view model for this view. So we're going to create that here. We're going to create an instance of that view model, which I'm going to call view model, and it's new player view model. It's important that you specify the specific type of view model that you're accessing. And inside of this initializer, we're going to get a list of players, which is what we need for our view. And to do this, we're going to go to the DB context object, go into the players. Now, at this point, it's not recognizing my context object, so I'm going to fix that. So I need to add a field to it at the very beginning. So I'm going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to add a private field called underscore context. That is an application DB context object. And then I'm going to make a constructor that initializes this object. Actually creates it and initializes it. So I've got this constructor, which will new up a DB application DB context object, set it equal to underscore context, which is my reference variable. And then I'm going to also set up a dispose method, which will dispose of the object when the class, or I'm sorry, when the player's controlled object that this class is based off of gets destroyed, then the context object will explicitly be destroyed also. It's a good practice to do this to make sure that all of your connections to the database are closed, being as how this is a object that connects to the database explicitly. So going back then to our action event here, we're going to continue with our statement. And what I'm going to do here is load up the list of players. Now, by definition, Entity Framework does what we call lazy loading. And lazy loading means that when the list of players gets populated into the collection of players, it's not going to load the team in, the team object, because it's referenced through a foreign key. So the include method, it essentially explicitly forces it to load the team object from the database into the player object. And we want that because we want to show the name of the team that the player belongs to in our table in our view. Then we want to order by P, where P is name of the player. And then we want to render this as a list, which will take care of that. And now notice that players is in red here. That's because my player view model has nothing in it. And we want a list of players to be in our view model because that's what our view wants. So I'm going to go over to the player view model class, and I'm going to add to this class a list of player objects. And I have to import player in so it recognizes it. And I'll call this thing players, and we'll make it an auto-implemented property. So now I've got a list of players. So you can come at this a variety of different ways, but if you start building your controller and you notice that you need something to give to the view, you need to put it in your view model. So you go to your view model and you add the property to it, and then you come back into your controller method and write the code to populate that object, which you then will pass to your view. So at this point, I can call up my view, and this line right here, I need to pass the view model to the view, and that's done like this. Now the view is in red because there is no index view for players. So my next step is going to be to go down to the players under the view folder, right click, and add a view. Now when I add this view, it's not a partial view, so I'm going to uncheck that. I do want to use a layout page. I'm going to click the ellipsis. The view that I want is under the views folder, and it is under the shared subfolder, and it is called layout. So I'm going to select that view, and I'm going to name this particular view index to match the name of the action method. And then I'm going to click add. It'll scaffold the view into place. And when it's finished, you'll notice that this view is now existing, and now I can build on it. So what I'm going to do to start with at the top of this view is I'm going to tell the view who its model is. So at model, and it's the player view model. So that's important because your model will be referenced in the view, and you want it to be strictly typed, so you have IntelliSense and compile capabilities that are enforced, and that's how you do that. The name of the web page will be players instead of index. And then the layout file is taken care of by what we did earlier. The heading for this page, instead of index, again, we'll call it players. At this point, we're going to create a table. And this table is going to belong to a class called table, as well as table bordered, as well as table hover. We want these three classes to specify here for our table so that it looks the way we want it to look. So it's going to be a table. It's going to inherit all the style attributes for a table. Then if we want the border, and then we want you to be able to hover over the table and have it retrieve focus and change colors and so forth. So let's put the head section in my table, which looks like this, and it includes columns for player, team, rank, and then a link for the delete. Now we're going to create a loop for our rows. So we're going to make this for each loop here. And it's going to iterate through the collection of players. And every instance of iteration through, it will name the current collection object player. And we can then make a row. And we're going to put in this row 4 columns because we have 4 columns in our header. So the first thing we're going to add is an action link, which is going to show the name of the player, followed by the action, what it will invoke when you click the link, the controller, who the action belongs to, and then this is an anonymous object where you identify an ID property and set it equal to the player ID. We do this so that when the user does click edit, the ID is passed to the action method. Now if I go over to my players controller, you'll notice under edit, there's an ID here. That's going to work because in my view, I identify the passing of the ID right here. Okay, the next 2 fields are straightforward. We're going to display the name and the rank of the player. I should say the team name. So player.team.name and player.rank in their own columns. And then we're going to add another action link in our 4th column, which will say delete. And when clicked, will take you to players controller, delete action method, and pass the same ID in. So again, in the players controller, we will see the delete action method has an ID passed into it, which will be populated by this line of code we created here. So that's it. That is the view. And I'm just going to indent this out and save it. Now to test this out, I can just click the Run button here and see if this works. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is my browser window. I'm just going to show you what I've got going here. I've got the Firefox browser, and this is my page. And you can see here that my nav bar at the top looks good. Got players, create player, teams, create team. The name of the league. The header looks good. The table, and you can see here that it shows the data that I created when I populated my database with some initial data. And then you can see that the columns are looking right. All of the teams are showing up. I'm sorry, the players are showing up. The correct teams are next to them, and I can see that these links are here. The links won't work because we haven't created the views for them yet. But we now have a working index view for the player. So we're off to a good start. Okay, now let's go back to the player's controller. So we've got the index taken care of. Now let's say we want to create a new player. So that's going to require a different view. So we're going to do that next. So I'm going to create a view for this, and the view is going to be called player form. So I know that the view that I'm going to ultimately call here, I have to stop my project for it to let me edit. This is going to be player form. And we're going to pass to it a view model, just like we did with the previous action method. And I have to create that view model in the method. So I'm going to do that here. Var view model equals new. This time I'm going to use the player form view model. And when you create a new player, we're going to say here that the rank of that player will be 1 by default. And also I want to, now, okay, rank is in red. So once again here we find that our player form view model, we need to create a rank property. We also are going to need to show a list of teams. If they're creating a new player, they're going to have to enter a name for the player, the rank, and they're going to have to pick a team. So we need to give the view a list of teams. So I'm going to make this variable called teams, set it equal to context dot teams dot, and I'm going to order by t where t dot name equal. That's my order criteria. And then I want to render this to a list. And now I have to create that list in my view model class. So I'm going to go over to that. So I'm going to my player form view model, and I'm going to go here and add a public list of team objects. And for this to work, I need to import my team class model in as a reference, and I'll make this an auto-implemented property. So I also needed a rank, so I'm going to set that up, and that will be public int rank, getter and setter. Now I'm going to annotate this property because I want the rank to be required, and I also want this to have a range constraint imposed upon it where the range is between 1 and 10. Now, because we're in this player view model, at this point, for creating a new player, this is all we need. So I'll go ahead and go back to the controller. Let's see here. Yeah, right here. Now everything at this point looks good, except the player form is in red. I'm going to go back and add one more thing to my player form view model. I want to set it up so that the ID is initialized when a new player is created. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go in and make a constructor which takes no arguments. Oops. And inside of this constructor, I'm going to simply set ID to 0. Now, there is no ID. So again, I have to go back to the, oh, I'm sorry, I goofed up. Didn't mean to say that. I need to create the property up here. So I'm going to go up create a public int ID, and now I want this ID to be able to be set to null, because when a new player gets created, the ID will be null in the database, not in the objects, the object library, but in the database. So I want to make it nullable. And you always can do this with primary keys when you're putting them in your viewModel classes. Now I can set ID to 0. Okay. So back to my players controller. Now everything is good except we have to create this player form view. So I'm going to go down to my views, into players, right click, select add view, and I'm going to call this thing